Whether you're joining one of our events for the first time or if you're a seasoned regular, welcome to the Competitive Intelligence Summit. This is a brand new event covering all aspects of competitive intelligence, brought to you by Product Marketing Alliance. We have an incredible selection of innovative content lined up for you today. But before we dive in, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, speakers, and you, our lovely audience, for joining us. From wherever in the world you are watching, we are sure you will enjoy today's talks. To get the most out of these sessions, please make sure you're sharing your feedback and asking questions in the comment section for our speakers to answer. Each of today's session recordings will be uploaded to our on-demand content library, which you can access with a PMA Pro membership or Access All Areas Pass. We're also really excited to announce that the Competitive Intelligence Alliance is becoming its very own community. We'll have more information to follow soon, but for now, you can join us in the Competitive Analysis channel in the PMA Slack community to connect with peers, to get access to fresh content, and to discover new opportunities. But for now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a headline sponsor for the event, Clue, and Brandon Bedford, who is the Competitive Enablement Manager at Clue, who will be guiding us through the day's insightful sessions.
Hello, product marketers, competitive enablement and intelligence experts, friends, and peers. My name is Brandon Bedford, Competitive Enablement Manager at Clue, and I am beyond thrilled today to be welcoming you all to Product Marketing Alliance's Competitive Intelligence Summit. For those of you that don't know Clue, we're a competitive enablement platform that helps product marketers just like yourselves collect and curate intelligence on your entire competitive landscape, enable all of the teams within your organization that need it, and ultimately help you build a competitive program that drives real revenue results for the business. And for those of you that don't know me, I've been at Clue for just over 2 years now. So I've been working with product marketers for a fair amount of time on building their competitive programs. But I have to be honest, I've only been a product marketer for just about 6 months. And so this is a fairly new world to me. And I have to say, one of the things that's really pleasantly surprised me about this space now that I'm officially a product marketer is just the sheer hunger of everyone that wants to learn, that wants to elevate themselves, but also their teams and their organizations. As a lifelong learner, it's something that really excites me about being a product marketer. And it's also why I'm especially proud and honored to be emceeing the summit for you all today. I think the Product Marketing Alliance has done a great job at connecting product marketers, of course, but also building an ecosystem of collaboration and sharing. I know personally, I've met a lot of great product marketers and hopefully friends, lifelong friends through the Product Marketing Alliance and the many events that they've put together. And so again, I'm really excited and honored to be here to MC you through the Product Marketing Alliance's Competitive Intelligence Summit. For those of you that are just starting off your day, grab yourself a coffee or a tea or a beverage of choice because we have an absolutely jam-packed agenda today, chock full of amazing presenters. And the topics really span a wide variety of themes, from how to drive sales adoption of your competitive content to how to build a competitive program from scratch if you're just starting out, or this very popular topic of how do you move your competitive program from something that's more of a back office function to elevating it to the boardroom and to the executive C-suite. And so there's a whole bunch of great content and amazing presenters that I'll be introducing you all to today, but it is a full day of events. And I know that's a lot, totally understand if you can't make it. For any Product Marketing Alliance members, you will be receiving the recordings after the event. But even if you can't make all of the sessions live, if you head on over to the Summit website, you're actually able to curate your own agenda and choose the sessions that you want to attend today. I'm going to be completely honest. I don't think there's a single session on the list that I'm not excited for. So I get that it's a hard activity, but of course, we all have our full-time jobs and many tasks on our plates to be dealing with. So if you're not able to make all the sessions, that's totally okay. But I do highly recommend checking out the agenda and signing up for the sessions that you'd like to attend. And to kick things off, I'm really excited to introduce Benjamin Hoffman, who's the Senior Manager of Competitive Intelligence at Adobe. And Benjamin's going to be discussing a topic that I think maybe some of us don't think about enough, which is he's going to be sharing why competitive intelligence programs fail and what we can do about it. I hope you enjoyed the first session.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Hoffman, and I'm the Senior Manager of Competitive Intelligence for the Adobe DX Competitive Center of Excellence. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to be a part of today's Product Marketing Alliance Competitive Summit and to be able to share this presentation with you on why competitive intelligence programs fail and some things that you can do to avoid failure and be successful as a CI function. As a note, all views in this presentation are my own unless otherwise noted, but I'm really excited and let's get started. So I've got a pretty straightforward agenda today. I'm going to be kicking things off by talking about the current state of the CI profession. This is intended to really set the table as we pivot over to the main part of today's presentation, where I'll be talking about some of those common CI blind spots and what you can do to avoid them. Just one quick note on that. So I will be speaking about these primarily from the standpoint of an enterprise level organization, although on a couple slides, I'll be showing information that spans the whole gamut from small to mid-sized businesses all the way up to large enterprises. From there, I will provide a quick recap of the key takeaways, and then we'll open things up for Q&A. So to get things started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the CI profession and how interesting it is that, over the last few years, it really seems like it's grown quite a bit. More companies than ever seem to be hiring for CI roles. And oftentimes it's either to build a program totally from scratch or to elevate an existing program to the next level. And sure enough, I found some really cool data that seems to substantiate that. According to Crayon's 2022 State of Competitive Intelligence report, 42% of all companies are planning to grow their CI headcount in 2022. And I believe Clue had pegged that at just over 30% for the same period. So you can think of it as like 35%. So pretty healthy clip. And, it's possible these numbers may change a bit given we're entering a interesting phase of the economy. We might have a recession coming up, and obviously with COVID, and there's a whole bunch of macro things at play that might slow those numbers down. But for now, they look like pretty impressive growth numbers. At the same time, more than half of all companies stated that their CI function was only ad hoc or emerging, according to that Crayon report. And this was especially the case for smaller companies, but I was surprised to see that just about half of all large enterprises still have immature CI functions. So there's still plenty of room for growth when it comes to CI programs within these organizations. At the same time, Crayon's report highlighted the value which competitive intel is bringing to today's organization. So in 2022, a whopping 77% of companies reported that CI was either important or absolutely critical to their success. And in fact, Crayon's report stated that the number of respondents who cited CI as being absolutely critical to their success has increased by 23% from 2 years ago. So there's not only this growing demand for CI and CI functions, but there's this aspect of value that's being brought, which together, it's a pretty powerful combination. And then simultaneously, the market is continuously growing more and more competitive. So look at the chart on the left. That's also from that current report. In 2022, a whopping 94% of companies claim that their respective market has gotten more competitive compared to recent years. And more respondents than ever claim that their market was getting, quote, much more competitive. Similarly, the Product Marketing Alliance conducted a study with Clue titled The State of Competitive Enablement Report 2022, in which they claim nearly 89% of respondents had stated their competitive landscape has become more competitive just in the past year. And about 83% claim that their market has become more crowded during that same time frame. So pretty remarkable numbers. So what does this all sum up to? Let's help this confused gent out, shall we? So what it means is that, pretty simple, competitive intelligence is more important than ever. But there's just one problem, and it's a pretty big one. Well, there's a few problems. All right, so there's more than just a few, but I only have 25 minutes today and not several hours, and I think you should all be thankful for that. But the issue is this: competitive intelligence is a highly complex function, and with complexity comes blind spots, and with blind spots comes the potential for failure. And so what types of things are we talking about here? When I mentioned 4 things in particular, I'm talking about, first and foremost, ignoring the individual needs of different teams and stakeholders and creating a cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all CI program. I'm talking about having all this great information, but neglecting to put all the puzzle pieces together. So having great intel in different parts of the organization or different sources for great intel, but not putting the pieces together. I'm referring to failing to forge the proper infrastructure to understand who your competitors really are. And last but not least, forgetting that CI tools, as great as they are only half of the battle. So 4 things that are pretty commonly seen, and I'm going to talk about each one right now. So the first blind spot is ignoring the individual needs of different teams and stakeholders. So most CI functions are going to serve a variety of different stakeholders. And the first step, or one of the first steps for any CI program, is to understand who these key stakeholders are. And in most cases, it will consist of any or all of the following. So the first, of course, is sales. And they're wondering, where are we differentiated? What are our key strengths and weaknesses? Secondly is marketing, specifically product marketing. And they're wondering about things like, what messaging or positioning is unique that we can use? What's a value proposition that a competitor is using so we know not to use that, or to try something a little bit different? Third is product management. And they're thinking about things like, what are our product gaps? What are the latest competitor products and market trends? Fourth is customer success. They're thinking about things like, what are the latest competitor news and announcements around products and pricing? So as my clients are coming up to their renewal time, I have the right ammo in place to talk with them. Number 5 is solutions consulting and engineering. So they're also, of course, on the front line, but they're thinking about much more technical aspects of competitive intelligence, maybe things like, how does the UX and UI compare? So much different than what maybe someone in sales would be looking for. 6, of course, is C-suite. So they're thinking about really big ticket items like, what do I need to do to keep the business growing and to keep our customer base afloat? Number 7 is customers. So sometimes competitive intelligence can be customer facing, or in part, and maybe they're working with product marketing in that respect. And so customers are thinking about things like, why should I go with you? Why are you better than the competition? And then number 8 is partners. So partners might be helping you to sell your product. And so they're thinking about things like, what do I need to know to help sell your product against the competition? So if we're not creating very tailored content for each of these different areas, we're going to get a sad cookie. We don't want sad cookies. We want happy cookies. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to get how to get to the happy cookie place. But first, we're going to start just by talking a little bit about some of the different needs with these stakeholders. So in some cases, you might be, as a CI function, you might be focused just on a single stakeholder group. It's pretty rare, but maybe maybe there's a primary focus. Maybe that's just on product management or on sales. And within that, you can still have different nuanced differences. Like you could have geographical differences. You might have some people in Europe and in APAC and North America, and there's going to be differences there. Second is tenure. So, the person who just joined the company last week out of college is going to probably have a different understanding of the competition, the markets, the products versus the person who's been in the field for 10, 15, 20 years. And that really impacts the type of content, the type of intel you're pushing out. Third is the preference for how and how often to digest intel. So, some people might want written intel like battle cards. Others might want podcasts. Others might want demos. That can differ. And then also what can differ is how often you're pushing that content out. And fourth is individual goals and objectives. So someone in sales might be focused on hitting their quota. Someone else might be focused on breaking into a new market, a new region. So the differences can vary quite a bit. There's also multiple stakeholder groups. This is generally, as I sort of talked about in the last slide, this is generally where CI is focused, is across different stakeholder groups. And in addition to what we see in the single stakeholder group column, we're seeing all those different needs, but also needs around different types of competitors and markets covered. Differences on the preference on the level of depth. So, C-suite probably just wants the key takeaways on the competition, versus solutions consultant might want a long document on what are the key differences between competitor X and your company. Similarly, there's probably a different appetite for or understanding of technical detail. That solutions consultant is going to want that information, but the salesperson might only want some of it. They don't want all of that. So you have to keep that in mind. And then the last thing is there's an expectation for action items and key takeaways. That's going to be different from team to team. The product management team is going to want, what do I need to know for our product development process? The sales team is going to want to know what sorts of things are key advantages for us when I talk to customers or prospects. The marketing team is going to want to know what are some unique messaging ideas that we can throw into our materials. So these things can vary very much depending on stakeholder. So I threw this in here. It's what's called a plan, do, check, act. It's a very simple cycle, probably a little unorthodox to be in a competitive intelligence presentation. But I thought this captured what I believe to be a good way to solve that issue pretty nicely. So before we jump into anything, to plan, then the plan phase, we really want to understand the overall business objectives, of course, so that when we get to the do phase, we're asking intelligent questions. We know what the right things to probe on are. But once we get those business objectives, we want to do segmentation analysis. We want to understand who our stakeholders are. And so we can do that through surveys. We can try to understand who needs competitive intel, who's asking for competitive intel the most, and what sorts of teams internally might be best fit to receive competitive intelligence. So that's really the first step in all of this. And then the second is the do phase, and that's where we start to meet with and or survey stakeholders, but ideally meet or have conversations one-on-one with. And in these conversations, this is where we're going to start to ask questions like, what are your needs, objectives, and key pain points? And importantly, what about your stakeholders' key needs, objectives, and pain points? Because it's not always about just your stakeholders, it's about their stakeholders. And so it's important to probe around that as well. What types of programs and content would you like to see or would be most helpful to you? What competitors, of course, do you want us to focus on, or who are you seeing the most? What do you see as the biggest threat? So we want to start asking a lot of questions. This is just a small sampling of the types of questions we can ask. And then from there, we hop over into check. And this is pretty closely tied to do, but this isn't so much about asking, it's more about asking what is needed versus confirming that what you already have is on the right track. And so you probably already have some competitive intelligence. You might be starting from scratch, but chances are you've got something out there. And so you want to get an understanding of, is this what your team needs? Is this what you individually need? What sorts of content programs would be useful to you? Is the technical depth there for what your needs are? So there's a whole bunch of questions that you can ask to sort of check on how well you're doing as a CI function. And then fourth, of course, is to act, to build those improvements, to first of all, to understand and to be able to, from a 30,000-foot view, look at all that feedback that you got and to parse it out, and then to start building those improvements into the program. And that can take time, that's not going to happen overnight. But the cool thing about this is you can start to benchmark as you go into that next phase of planning and doing and checking, and you can start to sort of rinse and repeat and iterate on this and get to a really good place with your CI function. And what that does is, almost forgot about Happy Cookie, that brings a happy stakeholder, and that's what you want. That you want your stakeholders to be satisfied with what you're doing as a CI function. That's the goal. The second blind spot that I'm going to talk about is having a ton of great intel at your disposal, but not necessarily having all the pieces put together. So all these different things like competitor news, market trends, internal data from your CRM, which I'll talk about more in a bit, competitor product updates, tech trends. There's a whole bunch of different things, competitor financials that in isolation provide a nice glimpse into competitor or market, but together provide a really powerful picture of what that competitor, that market, or what's happening with that competitor, that market. The other thing too is that different teams in your organization have probably already done some form of competitive intel already. Maybe the sales team has done some, maybe the product management team, the product marketing team have done some, but it's staying within those teams. It's not being shared within the organization to other teams. And so I thought this quote from Peter Mertens from Sprout Social really summed it up nicely. He says, across departments, every employee in your organization should be a competitive detective, but there needs to be a central team to be able to isolate that content or isolate that intel and share it out with. And so if everyone's data is everyone's job, if competitive data is everyone's job, then it's no one's job. I thought that summed it up really, really well. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the CI function needs to serve as the central hub for all of those different disparate forms of intel and all of the intel that's been done across different teams. And what that does is it brings that data from sort of this hub and spoke model into a centralized hub. And you can then take a much more powerful, much richer view into those different areas. And you can vet it with these different teams. You can work with these different teams to make sure that the content that you're creating from that intel, whatever it is, battle card, webinar, is as rich, as robust, as strategic as possible. And so you're building out this network as you're building this centralized function. So it's you're sort of killing two birds with one stone here. And I know that's really simplifying it. This is not an overnight thing, but this is the goal. You want to be able to use that CI function in-house as a central hub, because that's where you'll really get those rich insights from. So the third blind spot is not understanding who your competitors really are, because you or your company haven't done enough to forge the right infrastructure to properly get that data. This chart should be a familiar sight for a lot of you. I know I've seen this time and time again in my CI career at different organizations. And it's also a really unwelcome sight. It's an ugly chart because it means you turn once again into this guy. You don't want to be this guy. You're confused about how to interpret what you're really seeing as in your competitive space, because you've got some detail on your competitors, but you've got a lot of detail that just says, well, it's some other competitor, or we don't have any competitors. And what this means is you're probably not tracking that data the right way within your CRM. Maybe it's not enforced. Maybe you're not asking the right questions. Maybe you don't have the right pick lists. Maybe there's not an incentive to do it. Whatever it may be, the salespeople, they're not doing it. And so you're getting this really terrible data that is basically useless, and it doesn't give you the right insight to be able to go out and create powerful content for those different stakeholders. So it really comes down to this. CRM data is critically important. I mean, it could and should be gold for your CI function, but the unfortunate reality is that is more often than not fool's gold. So what do we do? How can we reduce the likelihood of this all too common scenario? Well, it comes down to 6 simple steps, which again, I realize this is a simplification of it. This doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen without pushback, doesn't happen without some political stuff going on or potentially going on, political pushback, things like that, because that's sort of been my experience with this sort of thing. But these are the right steps to take to set yourself up for what I call CRM gold. The first is you want to get buy-in from the sales leaders. You want them to understand why their teams should be putting in more time to put information into the CRM, because they're already spending all day in there. They don't have the time, or so they think they don't have the time, or the sales leaders don't think they have the time. You need to define for them why it's important that their teams go in and put this information in, put competitive information in. But then you need to find a champion, someone either maybe in sales ops or a CRM architect or admin that you can collaborate with to develop project goals and plans, develop ways to improve the flow within your CRM so that this data can be richer or better. Step 3 is reviewing sales analysis, and this may have already been done by a sales ops team. But this is really where you're going to get information on where in the sales cycle competitors are appearing most often, because this is where you'll want to understand, well, where in the CRM, where in the workflow, should there be questions about who you're seeing as a competitor? And, this is a really informative piece. So this is a very, very important part of the process. Step 4 is taking that information back to the sales leaders, confirming it with them, making sure that everything looks right, and then you want to work with them to communicate what's going to happen in the CRM with the field, so that they know what to expect. And an important part of this, which I haven't noted in here, is you probably want to incentivize them, especially at first, because this is added time on their part. But it's also crucially important that they're putting in the right competitive information into the CRM. So, whether it's like a Starbucks gift card to the first 100 people, or, the last 100 people who put in competitive information, or you pick a winner out of a hat, whatever it is, to get that information into the CRM, you got to take those steps. The 5th step in the process is to start building a comprehensive pick list of known competitors. And so that sales analysis can be helpful with that. Your other competitive information can be helpful with knowing who exactly those competitors are. And building that into the CRM, enabling the ability to select multiple competitors as well as a primary competitor. And then for closed won-loss deals, adding a list of reasons why you won or lost. In some cases, you can add competitive drop-downs in multiple steps of the process. So if a competitor drops out or if a new one shows up, you add that information as well. But starting out, that's, you want to maybe start out a little bit simpler so that you're not overwhelming the sales teams. And then last is building reporting in to automate the capture of this data. That's really important, so that every month, every week, every quarter, you're getting an update on who the competitors are, why you're winning and losing. Critical piece. So the 4th and final piece here, the 4th and final blind spot that can lead to failure, is that as great as CI tools and CI software are, and there's plenty of them out there, they can help with monitoring news and tracking changes, determining share of voice across social media. As great as these tools are, without human intelligence to decipher what it all means, then those tools are as good as wasted money. And a lot of those tools, or I should say a good number of those tools, are expensive. They're not cheap. They're great, but without the human intel component, they're wasted money. And so ideally, the CI function is pairing these tools with one or more analysts to make sense of this information. Because again, the analysts that you probably already have this software, if you're using it, is great for, I'll show you in just a minute. Oh, actually, before I go there, this Alok Vasudeva is a good friend and a mentor of mine, and he had this really great quote, that collection without analysis reverts the analyst to the role of a librarian. And being a librarian is essentially part of the role. You're capturing all that intel, as I showed on the other slide. You're creating that hub, but you also want to be a strategist. You want to be an analyst. And so the idea is that in some cases, and this is from Quantify, this chart here, steps to create a successful CI process, pretty straightforward: identify the competition, gather information, perform a CI analysis, share that intelligence, turn insights into action. Many of those steps, the CI tool will do a good chunk of the work. That, things like website changes, product updates, capturing news and PR. But the analyst is still going to be a critical piece for things like identifying who the competition is, making sense of what's happening in the market, being able to cobble together several news articles and figure out what's noise versus what's actually important. And then, of course, sharing insightful updates with recommendations to the right stakeholders. So without the analyst doing that, again, you're wasting money on just having a CI tool and not really parsing out what that intel really means. And don't get me wrong, the CI tools are great, but it's also important to have the human element involved. So that's basically it for me. Just to capture some of the key takeaways here, you need a captain for your ship. The good news is you probably already have a crew between sales and marketing and product management. You just need to be the captain. You need to bring that crew on board, get an understanding of what their needs are, and work with that crew, work with those different teams to build a world-class competitive intelligence program. The second takeaway is that not every stakeholder wants the same thing. And the good news here is that if you take the time to learn about each of the stakeholders' needs, you can actually help build that crew. You can start building relationships that way. And so you're sort of killing two birds with one stone there. Third is that your CRM data probably isn't great. Well, the good news, first of all, is that you're not alone. But secondly, you have the tools and resources to improve this, as I've mentioned. And again, you're probably going to get some pushback as you try to make these changes, but they're worthwhile because competitive intelligence, as we saw at the beginning of this presentation, is crucially important to so many organizations. And then last but not least, CI software is awesome, but it ain't enough. The good news here is that the combo of those tools, along with dedicated analysts who you may already have, or if you're not, you might be hiring because a lot of teams are growing. It's an immensely powerful combo. So hopefully this was helpful. I'm sure for a lot of you, some of this was probably already old news, but for some of you, hopefully you learned a thing or two today. And now I'll take a few minutes for questions. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the summit.
There's a lot of ways to improve your life in 5 minutes.
Like microwaving a delicious frozen meal, or scrolling through 76 videos on TikTok, or holding a plank.
And now you can spend every Sunday morning filling your brain with competitive strategies. All in 5 minutes or less. Oh, hello there. I'm Ben Ronald and this is Coffee and Compete, Clue's weekly newsletter featuring the best of the best in competitive content. Whether it's interviews with competitive experts, downloadable guides and resources, our monthly Versus series, or the best of Clue Social, we'll bring it to you every Sunday morning. Competitive strategies in 5 minutes or less. So hit that subscribe button and we'll talk to you on Sunday.
right. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that session with Benjamin Hoffman at Adobe. And as I mentioned in the opening remarks, I think thinking about why our programs might fail is actually a really valuable exercise. There's that old adage that goes, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And if you're prepared for some of the ways that your program might fail, you're going to be all the better for it. Next up, we have a really great session coming up from Jana Frajova, who's the product marketing lead at Spendesk. And she's going to be discussing why competitive intelligence is crucial to your product launch strategy. So stay tuned for that, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Hello, everyone. I am super excited to be part of the Competitive Intelligence Summit run by the Product Marketing Alliance. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Sienna, and I am the product marketing lead at Spendesk, where I'm currently establishing a new marketing function focused on product-led growth. You may be asking what Spendesk is. You may not be asking what Spendesk is, but I'll tell you anyway. So Spendesk is a B2B spend management platform that helps more than 3,500 companies across Europe and the US make smarter spending decisions. Since our inception, our customers have handled more than 5 billion euro on our platform. And we were also voted the best fintech to work for in Europe, which is a pretty big deal. But the main event happened in January when we became a unicorn, which was a real highlight of my career because we even got talked about by the French President Emmanuel Macron. But back to the topic of today, which is competition. And specifically, I really want to talk about the competitive analysis that you have to do when you're analyzing new product bets, when you're deciding, should I invest? Should we build this new product? What exactly should we build? Because it's very different from established frameworks to analyze competitors that you're very well aware of for your core products. So let's start with a bit of a context. So obviously, when you're launching a new product or when you're analyzing a new product, there is a lot to look into. You have to understand the users, potential buyers, if they're willing to pay for you to solve their pain point. You have to have an idea about if the market is big enough for you to invest. You have to have understanding of different regulation and market trends. So competition is just one of the aspects you have to analyze, but I really want to deep dive here on this one because it's very different from how you analyze competition in your day-to-day job. So in this talk, we will discuss the key difference between analyzing competition for new product bets versus analyzing competition for established solutions. Then we will look into why does this matter and what are the questions you should be asking. Then we will look into what are the competitors you should actually look at and how to uncover them because you may not even know they exist if it's an entirely net new product bet. And then what do you next? So let's start with the difference. There are 4 key differences between analyzing the new product bets and an established product. First of all, the level of analysis. When it comes to a new product bet, you scan widely, but very superficially. You just want to have a rough idea. Whereas where you're looking at a core solution, you really need to have a deep understanding of what your competition is up to and exactly what key features they're offering, what value they're positioning, and what they're where they're moving. With a new product bet, you also want to scan the net very widely. You will look at all sorts of competitors to make sure you have a real grasp of this new market you may be entering. Whereas with an established product, you may just focus on your top 2 or 3 competitors. This is because you look at them in such a deep and tight manner that you don't have the resources to do this deep analysis for a wide net of competitors. This doesn't, I'm not trying to say that you should ignore all other competition, but you just have to be roughly aware of they're up to, but you really focus in a very deep level of detail at just a couple of competitors. Thirdly, you also use different tactics. So to analyze competition in a new market for yourself, you have to be quite creative to uncover who those competitors really are. Whereas with established product, you're pretty well aware of who your competitors are. So you're just employing very traditional tactics to just track what they're up to. And finally, the goal and the purpose of the competitive analysis is very different as well. With a new product bet, you're trying to assess if there is a market and how do you position when you're entering, versus with an established product, you're tracking your competitors mainly to understand what moves they make, so you can either take advantage of those moves or put up some defense on your end. For example, you may put up a specific sales campaign to steal their customers or something like that. The next aspect to look at is, why are we actually looking at competition when it comes to new product bets? Why does this matter? Well, there are two key aspects, and we can think about it as two different stages of analysis. With the first stage, you're just trying to ascertain if there is actually a market opportunity. And as weird as it sounds, a lack of competition may actually be a red flag, because if there is not a single competitor, not even any very basic small player, it may indicate that maybe there is not a market, because maybe someone would already be there. I actually feel a lot more comfortable if a competitor already exists in the market I'm thinking of entering, because it gives me confidence that there is a market. So the first thing, the first indication is, if there is competition, it means that there may be a market. On the other hand, if there is too much competition, that may indicate that maybe you're a bit too late to this market and you should reconsider. Third aspect to consider under this first stage, analyzing if there is a market opportunity, is if you actually compete for the same budget. And this is why it's so important, as we will see later, to actually also look at indirect competitors. Because, for example, in the past, I was working on a launch of a solar solution. It was basically a solution that would offer insights and customer engagement for customers with solar rooftops. They would get insights into their energy, into their billing, and things like that. But what we actually found is that our customers, utilities, they had one budget dedicated to all software related to renewable energies. And so we would be competing for the same budget with solutions that were very different from the one we were building. We were competing for the same budget with solutions that were not targeting solar or households with solar, but for example, we would be competing with solutions that would be targeting wind farms. So these are very different solutions, but they're competing for the same budget. So this is very important to understand in stage one, when you're actually analyzing, is there a market opportunity that I want to pursue at all? And competitive intelligence can really help you here to understand that. Once you make the decision, if you actually want to move forward with this product bet, then the second stage is, how do you position and how do you go to market? And this is again where you use the competitive analysis, because here you really want to understand what your competitive differentiators are against the new competitors. So how do you position? But also, what are the segments in the market that you should go after in the first place? Because maybe there are already segments in the market that are very well served by the competitors, or maybe there are segments that are underserved, and for you that may be an easier entry into the market at the first place, and then you can expand from there against those competitors a little bit better. So this is why it matters so much to really look at competitors and how to consider their findings in your decision making. But then, what exactly do you actually look at? So in the stage one, when you're just trying to analyze what the market opportunity is, you really want to understand if the competitors are even there to start with, but then are they actually established? Are they successful? Because again, this may indicate the quality and size of the market, and also how early or late to the market you may be. You also want to understand if they iterate a lot. So for example, recently I've looked at our competitors And I realized that they were actually iterating their pricing and packaging fairly frequently, which made me believe that they haven't figured out the market yet and they haven't had the right product market fit yet, which means that either the market is hard to find or that we still have a chance to enter the market because our competitors haven't figured it out quite yet. And then finally, you also want to look at are they a pure play or are they a part of a bigger company? Because that may also give you an idea about how easy it would be for you to go against them. And then secondly, when you're looking at your go-to-market and positioning, you want to also look at, for example, what the business model is that the competitors are employing. Is it free, product-led, marketing-led, sales-led type of business model? What's the exact target persona and market they're going after, the buyer journey they're offering, what's the roughly high-level solution and differences from the ideas you have. And all these different aspects will help you better understand how to position and which segment and buyers in that market to target specifically. But then there's also a question, what are the exact competitors to look at? So as I mentioned at the beginning, you need to be really broad in your assessment because you don't know that market at all, and you really need to have a good grasp on the rough scope of the competition in the market. So here I used an example of security solutions. So let's say your current market is keys as a security to get into your house. So all your competitors provide keys and doors and things like that. Suddenly, you're thinking about also offering some bodyguard services. So as part of your assessment, you should look at all companies that offer bodyguard services because these are your new competitors. But also, and it goes back to the famous example of jobs to be done, if a customer just wants to hang up a picture, they don't necessarily need to drill a hole. Maybe they will just use a glue to hang up the picture. So you have to be more creative about the different ways your customers or your potential customers may find the answer to their pain point, to their problem. So for example, if they're just looking for increased security, they may not hire bodyguards. They may look into solutions like more in-house solutions, for example, security systems. Or they may look at hiring a dog. So let's say that is a new adjacent or indirect competitor. So basically, you want to look at all types of competitors you can think of. You want to look at what's the presence of your existing competitors in this new market. You want to look at your new direct competitors in this new market. You also want to look at the different in-house solutions that your potential customers may be using to solve the pain point, because often these ones are actually the hardest to get out of because of sunken costs and personal emotions and things like that. And finally, there are also indirect and adjacent solutions to that pain point that you also need to consider. But this is easier said than done because often it's very hard to actually understand who these competitors are. When you're entering an entirely new market, you have no idea if they're competitors and who they exactly are and how to uncover them. So these are some of the tactics I've recently used to uncover competitors in a net new market that we were considering of entering. So you always do a ton of user interviews when you are analyzing a new market area to enter. So in your interviews, try to ask, how are you solving this problem? Or how would you search a solution for this problem? Or have you ever considered finding a solution to this problem? And through these user interviews, you may uncover a lot of different ways how users are solving the problem today and then what they have looked into. And these are specifically helpful to find your competitors, but also the in-house solutions that may not be advertised in the market. The second tactic is to think of yourself as a user. So for example, you can sit in front of Google and think, okay, if I had this problem, how would I search for it? And really put yourself in the position of the user, and a lot of solutions will come. This one I actually found extremely helpful, and it gave me a lot of new results and a lot of new competitor names. The third one is use associations of those potential users. So for example, imagine that you're building a solution for product marketers. So you would go into the PMA Slack channel and you would just ask, hey, does anyone has a solution to this problem? And this is a great way to survey potential users to find what potential solutions and competitors they may be using today. And finally, you may also think of the B2B or B2C equivalent. So let's say if you're B2B and you're considering a solution, try to think of what the B2C equivalent is today, because this may also give you an idea about how to position, what are potential users looking for, and it may give you a bit of open the horizons a little bit, even though they're obviously not direct competitors. And finally, you've analyzed all this competition, you've probably launched the product, and you may be asking, what's next? Well, the thing is, a successful product bet, a new product bet, eventually turns into an established product. So even though we have used slightly different framework to analyze new product bets, if the product bet is successful, you will eventually run the well-established framework to analyze competitors for established products that you already have. So it all comes to the same framework in a way. Thank you so much for coming and listening to this talk. If you want to read more information or more detail about my talk, you can go to the SASE go-to-market, where there is an article about analyzing competitive intelligence for new product bets, where I go into a little bit more detail into this framework. So that's all from me. If you have any questions, feel free to message me after this talk. But otherwise, thank you very much for attending.
Product marketing has grown to become one of the key pillars within an organization. And yet, a well-known frustration point within the community is that most of our colleagues still don't understand the daily responsibilities of a product marketer. But we wanted to break this cycle and shine a light on the incredible value that this role brings to the table, which is why we've designed a brand new book with this exact goal in mind. Product Marketing Misunderstood is guaranteed to equip you with the first-hand knowledge, techniques, and stories you need to amplify your role, establish your authority, and elevate your strategic value. Each chapter outlines and breaks down the most common product marketing principles, such as positioning, personas, segmentation, and OKRs, and flips them on their head to show you how applying your own trade on your colleagues and peers can give them the ultimate aha moment and finally understand what an influential and strategic asset you are. Page after page is filled to the brim with real-life actionable advice from the likes of Drift, Privy, Intercom, G2, Adobe, Zendesk, and more. And by the end of this book, you'll have the ultimate toolkit to present a formidable product marketing force around you and position yourself in a way that quite simply cannot be misunderstood. Want to be understood? Then read Misunderstood. Order your copy today.
Did you know that Product Marketing Core is accredited by the Chartered Institute of Marketing and Continuing Professional Development? Did you know that product marketeers from organizations like TikTok, Facebook, Sky, Typeform, Zendesk, Microsoft, and more have chosen PMA to get certified over other providers? That giants like HubSpot, April Dunford, IBM, Adobe, and SurveyMonkey help put the course content together, and that more and more companies are requesting PMA certification as a prerequisite to applying for jobs. Product Marketing Core is quickly becoming the product marketing certification of choice, and once you delve into the curriculum, it's not hard to see why. PMMC is the most comprehensive course around. It goes above and beyond the breadth and depth of any other product marketing course there is. And that's a fact. But don't just take our word for it. Here's what now certified PMM Gabrielle Dane had to say about it. This course is everything a product marketer needs, and it explores the unique role of a PMM in a way that has simply not been done before. And the good reviews certainly don't stop there. Hundreds of product marketeers have gotten certified with PMA. And with words like this, it's not hard to see why. Whether you want to get certified at your own pace, or join a virtual room full of others live and online, PMA is the product marketing provider of choice. See for yourself.
The Product Marketing Alliance membership is an incredible resource for product marketers with all types of experience.
It's definitely a goldmine of information and resources, from the Slack community to the templates and resources.
I can go out and see how are other people thinking about their growth strategies or product adoption. How are others thinking about the best ways to do customer interviews, or how others are setting up the content and customer advisory boards.
There's some great real life examples that I can either make a copy of or take as inspiration and really make my own.
Getting access to the videos and the templates is more than worth the cost, because you get to see what the top PMMs are doing and how they think.
From persona frameworks to go-to-market templates to articles written by experienced product marketers, this content has become an additional resource to help me succeed at my job.
My personal favorite is the mentorship program. It's definitely been a game changer for me.
When I have some planning time available, I love to look at the different videos and conferences that they have posted. I always love to hear how other companies are handling some of the challenges and opportunities that product marketing has.
I could then figure out what's the best way to adapt for us, as well as look at how other people are implementing them. So I can ultimately do the work of 5 individuals as a solo PMM.
Whether you're just transitioning into the field or you're a product marketing expert, I think there's content and materials that are useful for everyone.
And as someone looking to break into the role, I get a good grasp of what I should be doing and also what will make me successful once I do.
And the best thing is that as members, we get access to new content all the time. PMA constantly keeps adding more materials, articles, and tools.
this whole program's been very validating for me in my career.
And so I highly encourage you to check out.
I believe they keep pushing the bar and supporting their members to ensure that we become experts in the field.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed Yana's session. I think product launch strategies are a really important topic for really any competitive intelligence program. Although many programs may start by enabling customer-facing teams like sales or customer success, a successful product launch strategy really does need to take into account the broader market landscape. And so I hope everyone got some great actionable takeaways from Yana's session. Next up, we have another great competitive intelligence mind, and that is Alex McDonald, who leads market intelligence at Airtable. Alex is going to be chatting about a topic that I think really every competitive intelligence and competitive enablement person can really resonate with whenever something big happens in their market. You know, a competitor gets acquired or raises a new round of funding, and there's panic. And I think Alex is going to bring a little bit of calm to that conversation. His session is all about writing a crispy competitive news briefing that helps.
Hey, PMA, it's Alex McDonald from Airtable speaking to you from Toronto, Canada. Look, you are here because you are the go-to person at your organization for all things competition, or you are soon to be. And so when a competitor drops some major news, say a new product launch or a major acquisition, that is your time to shine and help the organization make some sense of it. But it's not always so easy. Sometimes competitive news can cause panic. Other times it gets dismissed completely. How do we navigate that? How can we help our organizations process competitive news while keeping their cool? In about 20 minutes, I'm going to do my best to give you the tools to do just that. You're going to learn from all the mistakes that I've made running 3 in-house competitive intel functions over the last 9 years. And so you'll know if you have this problem, if you recognize this next slide. I've got a special name for this situation. Whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever your chat channels are, somebody just drops a link to some competitor news. Have we seen this? Is anybody looking at this? Did we catch this? And you get extreme reactions one way or the other. Some people say, who cares? This is going to suck. Not paying attention. They don't know what they're doing. Other people might overreact completely in the other direction. This is not good news. They're closing in on our differentiators. I'm totally freaking out. I have a customer call this afternoon. Okay, this is not constructive. This is not helping anybody. And that's why we call this one the link and stink. Just dropping the link to some competitor news with no context, no takeaways. It's just prone to create these extreme reactions, either competitor dismissive, where we're not paying enough attention to what they're doing and how we might be able to learn from it or navigate any changes to our competitive environment, or competitor obsessed, where we just freak out and panic about every little thing and we don't put things in context. We don't want either of those extreme reactions. And so the link and stink is what we're trying to avoid here. I know I've definitely been there. You know, it still happens where people post the link to something quickly that they've just seen. Maybe they're having an emotional reaction, but then it's on us as the CI person to try to help the organization make some sense of this in a more constructive way. So, in our mission to do so, I want to offer you a few really helpful principles, some that I've had to learn the hard way, so that we can kind of have the right foundations here. Number one, it is not important. It does not matter whether you were the first one to share the news or to find the news. Jason Oakley from Clue made a LinkedIn post about this recently that really nailed down this one for me. So shout out to him. The important thing is that you're the one to help make sense of it, right? Sure, it's nice. It feels nice if you're the one to kind of say, hey, we just picked up this news and the full briefing is coming. Makes you feel like you're really like on the pulse of market changes. But you should take it as a good news in its own right if somebody else is paying attention to the competitive environment and they are the first to share. Now, again, if they're sharing it in a panicky way or in a kind of a flippant or dismissive way, we want to steer and shape the culture in a more constructive direction. But don't dwell on this and don't beat yourself up if it doesn't work out where you are not the first one to share the news. Number two, our goal in writing these competitive news briefings, these crispy briefings, is to make no trade-off between honesty and confidence. If there's tough news in this briefing that a competitor is kind of running up one of their strengths or closing a key weakness, or it's just a little bit hard to grok for the organization how fast they're moving or something like that, we have to face those facts. We can't gloss over those hard facts if we're really going to get to a shared understanding about our competitive landscape. But at the same time, it can't just be, you know, dark clouds and thunderstorms every time the organization hears from competitive intel. We do have to, part of our job, I would argue, is to have that confident point of view at the end of our analysis about how we're going to address this and how we're going to navigate our way through it. Maybe it's validating some things that we were already doing. Maybe it's opening up or exposing new opportunities for us. There has to, I'm not saying be positive for the sake of being positive. I'm saying I think our job is to face the hard facts, but then still end up at a place where we do feel confident and optimistic that we've got the right strategy and the right programs to go compete and win. And number 3, this is particular to product launches, but especially in our product-led growth world now. This is a tactic that I would really guide you to use cautiously. People are very keen and very quick to go and try competitor products themselves to make judgments about it. Tread carefully there. My rationale is actually, it's not what you might think. It's not because it's like unethical or anything like that, although the recent $2 billion with a B dollar settlement where Appian won over Pegasystems over some unethical CI might make that one a little more of a pronounced factor here in being careful with our competitive research tactics. There's actually a different reason for me. If I'm going to use a competitor product myself and make judgments about it, I better be real careful because I'm not the customer. I'm not the user. I'm somebody who's thinking about this product category all day long. And so things that seem trivial to me, to a new user to this product category, might represent hours of time savings. Conversely, things that seem really interesting to me and novel might be irrelevant, overkill, hard to understand for a user that's coming to this category or this product for the first time. So the kind of the operating principle that, you know, if you follow me or you've taken the course, you've probably heard me talk a lot about is customer obsessed, competitor aware. Part of being customer obsessed is not rushing to make our own judgments without putting the actual customer's experience and perspective at the very center. It's okay sometimes if you want to investigate competitor products yourself to round out your understanding, but especially for new products, try to take a step back, listen to how customers are responding, maybe look at how the competitors' community is responding, rely more on those signals, put more weight on those signals than on your own experience toying around with the product where you're not truly the user. Some of you might be thinking, well, I'm a product marketer and we sell a product to marketers or something along those lines, or I'm a researcher and we sell products to researchers. I still don't buy it. You're someone who thinks about that product category all day long. That's the key issue. So just be careful with that one. Okay. So a few crucial principles there to set the right foundations for our competitive news briefing. Here's the action plan. So the news breaks, maybe you're using a competitive intel tracking platform, and it catches something big. We're gonna take a tour through a few different steps that you can do within the course of a business day or less than a business day to get to that real crispy competitive news briefing. It's going to help everybody keep their cool and make sense of this shakeup, this competitive news in a constructive way. So here's how it's going to go. Let's acknowledge the news, right? If we are the first one to find it, again, it doesn't really matter whether we are or not. If someone else shares the link, that's fine too. Acknowledge the news on your competitive intel channel and say, hey, we're working on a full briefing. Here's what initially we noticed. Here's some of the questions we have. If you have thoughts on this, please comment below, right? Keep it open and work out in the open, right? Then we can do a little digging. So again, if there are customer signals that we can pick up just in reaction to the launch, we're going to want to put some emphasis on those and put more emphasis on those than any judgments that we might make as the competitor to this product, because we're quite biased, as I said. So look at social media. Maybe there's posts in the community where the competitor is posting. There's new help articles. There might be questions on those. Customers might be asking things about maybe the limitations of a new product launch, and you might be able to take that right back and work that into your briefing. But again, any customer signal we can pick up in the early moments after launch, really, really precious. And then we've kind of got to do some synthesis. Bit of a tongue twister there. Do some synthesis. Distill what we're seeing and all the points of view, maybe that are coming through internally and externally that we're collecting, into a first draft. And really do think of it as a first draft. It's going to be messy. It's going to be incomplete. It's going to be not quite right. These are the guiding questions that I'm holding in mind when I'm writing the draft for a competitive news briefing. First and foremost, again, you're seeing the theme here. What might this mean for customers? New functionality, simplified functionality? Is it going to, if it's an add-on product, is it going to complicate the way that they deal with our competitor commercially? So all kinds of things that a new product launch or an acquisition might mean for customers. Then what might this mean for us? And I tend to split that just in two by asking, what might this mean for our story? What might this mean for our positioning and messaging? Does this sound similar or different compared to something that we're saying? And then what might this mean for our roadmap and strategy, the actual product investments and bets that we're making? So there's like there's a split. The story stuff can be sometimes a little more immediate, a little more malleable. Like we can tweak our competitive messaging pretty quickly. We may need to do some training and enablement to make it really stick. But the roadmap and strategy stuff takes a little bit of a longer term view, right? And a kind of a higher altitude view. So that's how I tend to split up the what might this mean for us questions. And then the other one that can help avoid that Lincoln stink phenomenon is adding some context, right? So again, if you have a competitive intel tracking tool, this is a good time to go back in the archives, maybe look at past briefings you've done, and think about the overall strategy of that competitor as you interpret it or as they've told their customers, their audiences, their investors, what their strategy is, and then put this recent move in the context of that broader strategy. What are they trying to achieve as a business here if they launch this new product or this new functionality or made this acquisition? Get that together into a first draft. Again, it's going to be messy. It's going to be incomplete. This is where you want to turn to a kind of a trusted group of collaborators, share it, you can have a meeting if you like, discuss it, whether it's async or whatever, and get their feedback, get their questions, get their reactions before you go broad. So this is one that I've learned the hard way. In the past CI roles, I was very keen to like be the first one to break the news, get the briefing out there, didn't really run it by anyone. And my interpretation of what it might mean for us was just way off. And again, it's not bad to be wrong or to have a point of view and then be proven wrong. That there could have been a much smoother way to get to that conclusion if I had just started with a smaller group. Not necessarily, I'm not looking for like a chain of approvals here. I want their feedback. I want to get different perspectives in there. And then we go to the broader audience, and that's going to be the last step here. But if it's a new product launch, again, I might go to a product manager in my organization who I know has been thinking about that area of the product or of the problem space. I might go to a product marketer on my team who's been sort of developing our story as it relates to that area or that problem space. Maybe there's an executive that I would like to get their 2 cents on the more strategic part of it, and that last point about the context of the competitor's move and what they're trying to achieve as a business, and maybe a seller or maybe a solution engineer who's actually in there positioning against this competitor every day. What's their perspective on how this might shape the kinds of questions that customers have been asking us, or how customers might perceive us versus the competitor? I want a diverse, but still fairly small set of perspectives. Then let's get this thing out in the open. Let's work those questions in, and you can publish this living document, encouraging further comments and feedback from your wider audience. And one of my favorite things to do, and it's just such a simple little tactic, is you can kind of, in the final document, you can call out and shout out all the people that helped you come to that more refined point of view, right? So hey, shout out the product manager who gave you this insight about how we're thinking about the problem a little bit differently than the competitor is. Shout out some noise outside. Shout out the sales rep or solution engineer who helped you think through how customers might respond to this, and you use their direct quotes. And it feels almost more like a journalist than like creative writing or something that you just do solo. You're collecting quotes from qualified people, qualified sources on the story, if you will, and then putting it together into one distilled point of view. So that's the action plan for the day of when breaking competitive news hits your desk. The ultimate format then, just to kind of say it plainly, is pretty simple for me usually. I do try to have a little bit of a TLDR, like no more than 1 or 2 sentences about what this is and why it matters in like the most summarized form possible. And that's easiest to write last, right? Like go through all the detail, go through all the different considerations, and then take like an hour away from it, come back and say, okay, what is the actual crucial insight here that I need people to understand? And then it's what they announced. So I try to just say that in as plain, non-judgmental terms as possible. And then I get judgmental. So then it's what matters for customers. If there's oversights in this solution or in this launch or limitations of it, might call that out in there. And then what matters for us, again, how might this collide with either our story or our strategy? So that's ultimately the format that the briefings take and the process that gets us there. I want to give you then a few common takeaways, some patterns. I feel like I've written enough of these briefings that some of them start to sound very familiar. And so you shouldn't have to feel like you need to write the what matters to us section in particular from scratch necessarily, because I think based on the type of competitive activity it is and how you interpret it, the takeaways might sound similar to this. There might be kind of a lexicon of patterns that we might be able to find here. So I'll try 3 out on you, and you tell me if these are things that feel like it would apply to your business in the same way. So for example, if the news is that a competitor is now doing something that we already did, right? We already had this capability, or we already had a product in this area. Now they're doing it. The takeaway might sound something like this. Well, this validates our approach. This tells us that it's competitor signal, but it seems like they're also seeing that was an important customer to solve, the same way that we've known for years. And so they're catching up. Might feel like one of our differentiators has now been, closed, but we're on to the next thing. And then you might want to name, right, citing your friends on the product side, what a couple of those next things are that we think are going to give us our next wave or our next chapter of differentiation. So that's one common pattern based on the type of competitive news we're analyzing here. How about this one? A competitor is doing something that we don't do and we don't plan to do, at least in the immediate future. So they're kind of going in a little bit of a different direction. We maybe would say that we don't actually think that's the most important customer problem to solve. Our strategies might be diverging a little bit here. And so the onus then is going to be on us to articulate to customers why we think that the problem we're focused on is the more important one to solve. And the competitor, yeah, they've added these new capabilities and they might be different than what we do, but that doesn't mean it's the right thing for you. It doesn't mean it's the most crucial problem to be solving. Maybe sometimes if your strategies diverge enough, you might start to see situations where a customer has both of your tools, where they use you for the part that you're really good at, that you've been focused on, and what you thought was a competitor for a part that they've invested in that's a little bit divergent from your strategy. So there's that pattern. And then this third one, competitor is doing something that we don't do, but we do plan to do. So these ones are tricky, right? This is one that can really sometimes induce panic because it feels like we had a vision to add this product capability in the near future, and they got there first, right? And so kind of a constructive attitude to take here might be, hey, we're working on something similar. What we're going to do is watch their rollout, watch their launch here, listen for what customers find limiting, missing, incomplete about this launch, and we're going to learn from any missteps. And we can be a fast follower, if you've ever heard that term, where there's the kind of the first mover advantage. In some markets that matters a lot if you're just the first one there, the first one acquiring users. But sometimes that can actually be quite costly and risky because no one's actually jumped into that pool yet. Whereas if you're the second one in, you can watch what the first person did, learn from it, and move a little faster than them and potentially overtake them. And so that's kind of the debate team style, like spin or point of view that you might put on the story for this one. So, our other differentiation remains strong. Here's the updated battle card. We're going to watch this one and learn from their mistakes. So I thought I'd share that. It was interesting to actually reflect on some of the common patterns, because each briefing does have its own nuance and can be a little bit unique, but the core takeaways actually tend to follow some pretty common patterns. So hopefully that's helpful. So then returning to that Slack thread where someone was just sharing the link and kind of stinking up the channel with panic. Here's what a more constructive situation might look like. Maybe you, or as the CI person, drop the briefing. Hey team, we've been working as a small working group for the earlier today. And we've got our briefing ready on the latest launch. And just making up an example here, they've launched some analytics capability. 2-sentence TLDR. Hey, they're addressing a weakness that we know they had. We knew this from customer research, from our own win-loss or whatever, but we still have differentiators that remain strong. Battle cards have been updated, by the way. Oh, and here's the link to those. Clean, crispy, helps everybody keep their cool, right? You can get the TLDR if that's all you need. You can click into the briefing for more detailed or more nuanced analysis, but you'll know that you're on the right track if the response is less like those either obsessed or dismissive responses we saw earlier. It sounds more like this. Hey, maybe somebody from product jumps in and says, oh, this is really interesting and timely. We're about to start some research in this area. We're going to see if this comes up. Or we'll add, if the competitor is solving a new problem here, we're gonna see if customers actually think that problem is important when we do this research. Thanks for helping us connect the dots. Awesome, right? Maybe someone from a customer-facing role says, "Hey, I'm competing against them in a customer conversation. I'm meeting with that customer this afternoon, and I had seen the press release, but wasn't sure how I was supposed to respond. Perfect timing. I've got the battle card. I'm good to go," right? These are the kinds of much more constructive conversations that we can have if we just take that little bit of that time to process competitor news in a more constructive way, following that action plan that I've kind of done my best to refine and share in a way that's practical and useful for you. And so I have a course with PMA called Competitive Intelligence Certified, and we have a whole module dedicated to the competitive news briefing. And so the content today covered most of what's in that module. I actually added a couple things that were not in the course, particularly that section on the common patterns. That was something I was just thinking about recently, so I added that in. But it is one of, I believe, 9 or 10 different modules for all things competitive intel, from win-loss analysis to setting up what we call the listening stack, to bringing CI to sales and customer success, CI for product, CI for executives, and kind of everything in between. And so it is, for me, the summation of everything that I've learned over 9 years doing competitive intel. It is the resource that I wish I had when I started. And so I hope it'll be useful to you. If you do choose to join us, you can head to certified.productmarketingalliance.com and just zip down to the competitive intelligence course. But this could be you jumping in, learning about win-loss analysis in detail, how to create battle cards that sales are actually going to use and love, supporting your product teams with more strategic analysis. Become the go-to person for all things competition at your organization. So find me on LinkedIn. It's Alex McDonald. I'm with Airtable. Been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.
now that everyone's keeping their cool when something happens in their competitive landscape, this next session is actually a topic that I'm personally really interested in. When I speak with a lot of competitive intelligence and competitive enablement practitioners, there seems to be a big focus on making sure that we're keeping a pulse on what's happening in our market. And of course, that's super critical. But I think training and enablement often becomes an afterthought. And so this next session is going to be with Sam Rinaldo, who's a senior competitive intelligence analyst at HubSpot. And he's going to be talking all about how you can adopt a values-based approach to training. So I'm really excited for this session, and I hope you are too.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Sam Rinaldo. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about training and developing intelligence skills at your organization. This approach isn't just applicable to junior analysts or new joins, or even programs that are just getting started. In fact, it can be applied to a number of different settings. Ultimately, intelligence is about thinking better and making better informed decisions. So whether you've done it for a long time or you're just getting started, situations are going to change and you'll need to adapt in order to continue being successful. Analysts, directors, CEOs, they all need to think and act, and training is how we get better at doing that. Training should be top of mind for all of us, and that's especially true when a program is just getting off the ground. There are a lot of new organizations out there trying to do just that. In Cran's latest State of Competitive Intel report, they found that 57% of CI functions are either ad hoc or emerging. These programs are at a really critical stage in their development. They need to understand how their work integrates into the larger organization and what types of information they need to deliver to their stakeholders in order for them to make good informed decisions. Before I talk about why and how you'd adopt this approach, I want to first set the stage. This is how I define a values-based training approach. It's one that focuses on contextualizing how an organization thinks and acts, rather than instructing someone on how to accomplish tasks. And like I mentioned before, this isn't just for new joins or junior analysts. It's definitely useful when you're onboarding or cross-training, but it's also very relevant whenever you need to reorient your team to new responsibilities, new tasks, how they work with new teams, and internal changes within your organization. This can even be implemented when new trends begin emerging within your industry, and you want to make sure that that is an area that you're covering. Also, analysts can get overwhelmed when they're constantly producing new insights, and using this approach in professional development avoids backsliding into potentially bad habits or developing blind spots around the frameworks and thought processes that haven't been examined in a while. When we think about our own experiences with professional training, we can all at least recall some initial training or onboarding at a role we've held. You've probably seen some hits and misses throughout your career at different organizations. If you're an Intel analyst that's doing something like market intelligence or competitive intelligence or working in corporate strategy, you probably didn't get a whole lot of relevant information until you had been there for a little while and started really digging into the job. If you're on one of those emerging teams I mentioned at the beginning, I'm sure that's even more true. In part, that's because the traditional approach focuses on developing skills and teaching you procedures. And our teams might need that skill development and familiarization with procedures as much as anybody else. But Intel teams also have unique requirements that really don't fit well into everyone else's training, and certainly not into their training programs. Our kinds of roles typically involve juggling many complex issues all at once, and so the challenge is around optimizing our thought process and focusing our resources. More productivity doesn't necessarily give you better quality insights or drive executive decision making if it isn't directed towards a common goal and informed by a shared set of values or prioritization criteria. In a traditional approach, you'll work on skills or the ability to perform a task at a certain standard. You'll also learn procedures or how that task is performed within the organization. When available, you'll also be given resources, which are the materials and content that provide additional context. These tend to get jumbled up together in practice, with skill development being introduced as you're learning a procedure and resources kind of cited inconsistently along the way. And that isn't the most efficient way of going about it, and it can often not be very helpful. There's also usually less emphasis on those resources, since the learner can review those at any time, and it doesn't make sense to use the valuable hours that the instructors have. But in reality, those are the most valuable assets that you have for training. Overall, though, this is a pretty neutral approach. It'll certainly get new folks up and running, and you'll keep your tenured individuals largely on track. The issue is that it's very slow. You're letting individual human nature take its course when there are options available that'll accelerate your time to value. The traditional approach often ignores the whole reason you wanted an Intel program in the first place. And that's because it helps you build that institutional wisdom at an artificially rapid pace. So instead of handcuffing them to procedures and hoping that they gather the context they need out of the resources you provided, empower them to think, and they'll start solving issues no one knew existed. Traditional methods start boxing you in from the very beginning, and they limit your perspective to the things that you've always done before and the issues you've always faced in the past. We want to do the opposite and keep our aperture wide open until we know where we want to focus, and we want to do that while avoiding reinforcing unproductive frameworks. Without thinking about it, you might be reinforcing cognitive biases, which are mental shortcuts that sacrifice quality over speed. We've all used these strategies, and they have their time and place, but they're insufficient for achieving true analytic excellence. The first one I have listed here is almost so foundational that we don't think about it, and just have the other folks on the team show a new person how they've been doing it, or show a cross-functional partner how this part of the business does our tasks. It's simple, it's easy, it's a very pragmatic approach, but the effectiveness is totally dependent on that individual. Like everyone, that person isn't perfect, and they might leave out key details or provide outdated information. And because there's a high potential for reinforcing groupthink, it's not a substitute for a more thoughtful approach, either layered on in the moment or followed up on some time later. We've probably all heard this second line before too. I know I've used it when I've been talking to folks about complex issues. It puts the burden of learning back on the learner, which might be helpful in certain settings, but not in all. A fire hose of information is terrible for retention, and that's usually what this kind of phrase in a training scenario denotes. This can also even create a false sense of confidence within the learner because they think that they've gotten a good introduction to this material, but in fact, they didn't really ever go deep enough to develop a true understanding of it. This final example is the poll method. Just having the learner ask questions as they go along if anything confuses or concerns them. So if you're like me and you'd rather just go look something up than ask people a question, This might be a favorite, but in reality, this leads to assumptions and blind spots. And assumptions that you make during planning without ever validating are risks that you assume. This is especially important to consider when you're dealing with your more senior professionals, because you don't want to waste your time, you don't want to waste their time, but you also don't want them to be uninformed or worse, misinformed. Values-based training focuses on the complex set of criteria that information passes through during the decision-making process. These can be strategic values or the highest level of prioritization criteria within your business or organization. Nested underneath are organizational values, which denote a subset with slightly different angles on the strategic values. But the important thing to note here is that these can never be in opposition in order for the organizations to be moving together. Intelligence values, on the other hand, are how projects and analysis are shaped. And so these can differ quite a bit from the strategic and organizational levels, but they should always be supportive of the organizational and strategic goals. This all serves to put the power back in the hands of the intelligence professionals by equipping them with what they need to think and act in alignment with the larger organization without forcing conformity to a rigid set of procedures or the acceptance of status quo. The end state you're really working towards is one in which you and your team know how the decision makers think, know how each other think, and understand information that they need to see in order to make a good decision. In contrast to the traditional strategies that we had referenced before, which were likely common to all of us, these examples might be less familiar to folks. This first one here is a concrete example. The organization here has been presented with information and made strategic decisions based on it. So with your learner, you'll review things like, what decision did we make? How and why did we go about that? And what kinds of decisions made the cut and what got pushed down the road? That demonstrates a connection between strategy, or what we say, and the investments that we make, what we do. There's also alignment. And this is a critical exercise that often gets glossed over or rushed. This answers how small, discrete plans that your team may have are driving towards a strategic objective. And this is especially helpful for learners that are going to be responsible for resource allocation to help them make decisions when the program is getting pulled in multiple competing directions. The final example is a planning breakdown. So this is working through a project plan and asking the authors of that plan to essentially show their work in how they approach the problem logically. Ask them why they involved the certain stakeholders that they did, discuss whether or not the timeline was validated or assumed, and address decision points that they think could shift this plan if conditions change in the future. It's also important to review the indicators of success and failure and how they know whether or not a plan has been completed to their satisfaction. That last example is especially important for preventing backsliding, and it promotes a culture of analytic integrity, which, in my opinion, is really what differentiates intelligence from other types of analysis or staff roles. So I've talked a lot about values thus far, but what are they? So values can come in many forms, and it's important when you define them that you're honest with yourself and open with the rest of the organization. Don't rely on things like mission statements, because at the highest level, these are written very diplomatically, and they're usually too aspirational to give you the kind of honest detail that you need. A better source of your company's values come from an examination of recent decisions. This could be answering why an organization made a recent strategic shift into a new product area, why you made the most recent acquisition that you did, and talking about the parts of the organization that you're hiring into. You don't have to have a lot of values or a lot of examples to lean on. In fact, the less values that you have and define for your organization, the easier it is to focus. If you're a for-profit enterprise, revenue or profit might be number one, and those actually might even be your only strategic values. And you might choose to leave that nuance for organizational levels where you can rely on broader guardrails for your intelligence team. Strategic clarity is what we're after by going through this exercise. If you're having trouble defining these values, ask yourself, how do you prioritize equally viable solutions? With all other things being equal, what factor do you value above all others? This doesn't have to be 100% consistent because, to be honest, it's difficult to nail down, and also it changes over time. But it should always serve as a guideline so that your intelligence teams don't have to constantly revisit it and get down into the weeds with internal stakeholders. That encourages independent action and gives analysts the freedom to make thoughtful recommendations that go much deeper than just the surface. Implementing this approach really isn't as radical as you might think, especially if you don't already have a robust framework for onboarding or professional development. And I want to show you all an example from my time on the government side of the house, and it's directly applicable if you have any type of rotational positions in your organizations, but it's also broadly applicable to any kind of intelligence training or really anytime you're training folks. In this case, I identified an issue with how we were training mid-level intelligence officers to take over new roles in an operations center. And if you can't picture what I mean by an operations center, just think of a big room full of monitors and rows of people answering phones and responding to crises. You know, like a movie like War Games or Apollo 13, you can maybe think of. The main issue here was that it took way too long to get them up to speed. And when they did get into the role, it was taking months before they really had any clue why they were doing the things they were doing. Essentially, they just followed the checklists, which was absolutely enough to keep the mission going, but we had a lot of room for improvement and concerns about the future viability. So what I did was take a pretty aggressive look at changing all of that. So before, we were dealing with a 3 to 4 month long learning period that was followed by 12 to 18 months of working in the role. The majority of that time was spent on self-paced learning or shadowing a current officer. Then they'd prep for an interview panel during which the more senior officers would pepper them with questions, sometimes picking from a prepared list, sometimes just kind of making up as we go along. At the end, they'd go wait out in the hall while we made a decision on whether or not they knew enough to stay in the shift by themselves. It was definitely cumbersome, it was inconsistent, and at the end of the day, it wasn't super effective. What we did was trim that learning period down to 6 weeks. We made it much more structured, down to the individual days and hours. So instead of self-paced learning, I worked with them directly reviewing specific strategy documents, organizational policies, and leadership guidance that formed the underlying framework for the role. To provide a more specific example, one of the responsibilities of this position was to provide early warning to deployed military units. In the old pipeline, the officers learned how to watch for threat indicators and got a brief familiarization with different communication channels that they could use to disseminate information. The focus here was on what might constitute a threat, the content of the report, the types of reporting, the authors. They were really only evaluating the reports and the intelligence and not considering as much how they might be used by the units they were sending them to. In the new pipeline, we focused on the actual regional priorities of the commanders and the types of operations that were being conducted. Once they were familiar with what those operations were and the information that might impact them, the information they'd send would be much more targeted and relevant. What they did was they started looking more closely at the specific recipient of the information and the kinds of details that would actually constitute an actionable threat. The old pipeline focused on relatively easy questions, like who do I send this to? Where do I get alerts? When is this update due? The new pipeline focused exclusively on hard to answer questions. Which of these efforts would have priority? Who should get resources during search and rescue? And by reducing the timeline, we were also able to offer opportunities for overseas service, which was hugely important to these individual officers' professional development, but also for building long-term skills across the organization. The fundamental change was that we stopped preparing these individuals for a role and instead prepared them to think and to context switch between the diverse situations that they'd face. This equipped them with the ability to better handle things we hadn't seen before or solve emerging problems. And that's because they could make better judgment calls with greater confidence, and they could do that without having a year of experience already. It really reduced noise and streamlined cross-functional engagement, which opened up new possibilities to focus on sub-programs or aspects that hadn't previously been a priority for us. This approach has three main aspects: values, thinking, and communicating. The values portion is about conveying values and describing how they're implemented. That might be through strategy documents, reviewing a retrospective on past projects, or reviewing the current planning documents that are being actioned in the current time period. It's important to use concrete examples. It's not enough to just say your customer first. Describe a decision the business made that was actually driven by that value, like bringing customer service teams in-house or offering flexible payment terms. The thinking portion is the most involved because you're activating those values. I found this works best in a workshop setting that's led by a senior team member. The important part is documenting the thought process, because that's how you learn to be more intentional, by really breaking down why and how you came to each conclusion, reviewing what assumptions you're making, and how you'll validate those going forward. Communication is also critical because even the best piece of intelligence is useless until someone absorbs it and makes a decision based on it. It's both an art and science to curate those insights when they're needed without overwhelming decision makers. Communication is also just as unique to your organization as your values and your ways of thinking. Of course, anything you do needs to be measurable. When we think of training and development, we usually default to checklists or milestones or something similar. But to gauge the success of values-based training, you really need to see your learners in action. I recommend a ramp period of reduced tempo and narrow focus that expands on the kind of problems you analyze during the thinking stage of training. Take the time to explain the logic and context while closely documenting the thought process and decisions that you make. If you feel confident in your learner and the learner feels confident in themselves, then you've been successful. Thanks for joining me. Once again, my name's Sam Ronaldo, and I'll be here for a bit longer to answer any questions you may have.
Wow. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that session with Sam Ronaldo on a values-based approach to training. Now, for those of you that are just tuning in, we're approximately 1/3 the way through today's agenda. And as I mentioned this morning, it is a really jam-packed agenda. There's still a ton of great sessions coming up. And so do stay tuned, maybe take a quick break to grab a refill of your caffeinated beverage, or simply get up and stand from your desk and do a couple stretches. Next up, we've got Jordan Weiss, who is the VP and Head of Marketing at Compite. He's going to be talking about 3 pillars of CI for a winning go-to-market strategy. He'll be touching on people, process, and technology. And I hope you all enjoy.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jordan Weiss. I'm the VP of Marketing at Compite by SEMrush, a competitive intelligence automation platform. And I'm excited to be here today as part of the Competitive Intelligence Summit put on by the Product Marketing Alliance. Today, I'm going to be talking about people, process, and technology, and integrating those 3 pillars of competitive intelligence into a winning go-to-market strategy. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, it's no secret that the world has become much more competitive. Today's markets are more crowded, they're moving much faster and faster than they ever have been. And additionally, we're seeing that businesses really are no longer competing against 1 or 2 direct competitors, but against every experience that a consumer has against dozens and dozens of competitors in a market. More and more companies are entering new spaces. Existing companies are introducing new product and service offerings into adjacent markets. It's just becoming much more crowded space. And we're really in an era of economic Darwinism, if you will. Only the fittest companies with the most agile strategies that can anticipate and capitalize on market opportunity are the ones that are succeeding. A lot of companies are entering the market, but don't have that ability to pivot. And so what we're seeing is that those companies that are thriving and building market share are much stronger. So competition is becoming much, much stronger in the market. You know, they say fortune favors the bold. Well, the bold are the ones that are able to pivot and capitalize on new market opportunities. Now let's take a look at this graphic that you see here on the screen. This is a good example of what we're talking about. You may be familiar with it. This is the MarTech landscape graphic that was developed by Scott Brinker at chiefmartech.com. This shows the explosion of companies within the marketing technology landscape from 2011 to 2022. You'll see when back in 2011, when this graphic was developed by Brinker and his team, there were about 150 companies competing in the marketing technology landscape. And over the last 10 years, you see that it's exploded to approximately 10,000 companies in that space in 2022. They just put this graphic, the new 2022 graphic out just about a month or 2 ago. So what does this mean? This isn't unique to any one industry. This is what we're seeing across all industries. So what this means is businesses need to stand out to be and understand what's happening in their fast-moving markets to be able to compete better and thrive and build market share in their markets. And one of the ways to do that is understanding and leveraging competitive and market intelligence. So go-to-market teams, in terms of sales, customer success, business development teams, all need the right data, the right intelligence to be able to compete more effectively in their market. Now, contrary to what some believe, is competitive intelligence is not just about data. It's not just about providing more and more information. Raw data without context is basically useless. Organizations that launch an intelligence initiative, whether it's a market intelligence, a customer intelligence initiative, or competitive intelligence initiative, need to consider a tight balance between people, process, and technology. Those 3 disciplines are critical to the success of a program. Whether you're in the early stages of building out an initiative from scratch, competitive intelligence initiative from scratch, or trying to figure out how to make the one that you currently have more successful, if you skimp on any of those people, process, or technology, your chances of success are really going to plummet. Now, also, it's no secret that product marketing teams are pretty stretched. 2021 PMA State of the Product Marketing guide that the PMA put out last year surveyed product marketing teams, and 40% of those surveyed product marketing teams were between 2 and 4 people. Now that is highly disproportionate to the size of sales teams, size of product development teams, size of other marketing teams. Product marketing teams, who are usually responsible for these intelligence initiatives, are usually very small teams. So it's vitally important to make sure that you're creating these processes, creating this initiative properly to ensure success of these intelligence initiatives. So let's look at these one by one. It all starts with people. Someone's got to steer the ship, right? So before even thinking about how you're going to do it or the tools you're going to use to execute on this initiative, what you really need to do is identify the right people. Every CI strategy, every intelligence strategy starts with someone deciding that it needs to happen. From the executives who decide CI is worth the investment and giving it their backing, to the people that are responsible for building out the strategy, to the people that are tasked with the day-to-day operations of managing the initiative itself. People are necessary at every stage to ensure a competitive intelligence initiative is successful. Regardless of what type of tools, what type of automation you use, people are the foundation of a successful program. So what we recommend and what we tell our customers is there's 2 things that you really need to do. You really need to define the key players. And what we like to use is the old tried and true RACI model, the responsible, accountable, consulted, informed model. It's nothing new. It's a tried and true model, but for us, it seems to work really well in building out these types of initiatives. Who's going to be responsible for carrying out the process and tasks and getting the job and really getting the job done? Who's responsible for its success or failure? Who's the one that's accountable for it? Who's going to be consulted? Who's going to be provided the information and is going to be able to determine the success or failure of this program? It's the subject matter expert, it's the stakeholder. They're not directly involved in the day-to-day, but they're going to be key to the success or failure of this program. And who receives the output? Who's informed? Who gets to consume the information that gets provided by these teams? So in our case, it's the sales team, the product development team, the corporate strategy team, the customer success team. Those are the consumers of this key intelligence to help them do their jobs better. Once we've identified the key players and the key roles within the initiative, it's also picking the right people. Do they have the right skill set? Are they able to translate the raw data into a contextualized story, into a story that is going to be able to help these organizations do their job better? Are they able to identify the right goals? Really understand why we're undertaking this initiative? What are the challenges that we're facing that this initiative will help solve, and map that to a series of goals that can be measured for success? And then also, this goes without saying, but do they have the right bandwidth to do this? Unfortunately, that's one of the ones that doesn't get the attention that it deserves many times, because again, teams that are most responsible for the overall management of intelligence programs is a lot of times the product marketing team. And as we just mentioned, product marketing teams are fairly small. But with that said, with the right tools and the right processes in place, which we'll get to in just a moment, those initiatives can be managed with limited bandwidth and limited resources by those teams. Now, people are a prerequisite to any competitive intelligence initiative getting off the ground. But if they're not given clear directive on what needs to be done, a lot of times these initiatives are doomed for failure. Ad hoc initiatives too often lead to inconsistent results and inefficient practices. A lot of times these initiatives are very time consuming, very manual in terms of research, very laborious in terms of analyzing the data, providing the right information to the right teams. And that leads to inconsistent ad hoc programs. But if we put the right processes in place and use the right tools that are run by those people, by the right people, it becomes much more consistent, a much more effective, a much more efficient program. The old saying is failing to plan is planning to fail. Well, this couldn't be more true in a competitive intelligence initiative. So it's really about understanding what the challenges are. Why are we undertaking this? Why do we need to have more information to be able to do our jobs better? And what are the goals? What are the main priorities? Why are we achieving undertaking this program? We got to have clear goals that we have to map to be able to undertake a successful program. And as I mentioned before, who's involved in the process? What are the resources that we're going to be using for executing this program? And what are the gaps that we have? Where do we need to employ new tools and new resources that we don't currently have? And we'll talk about that more in just a bit. But how will those tools be used, and who's going to be using them? There has to be somebody who's managing the tools. It's also about developing a timeline, a general timeline for how long these initiatives, this initiative will take, and the steps within that initiative is extremely important to provide guardrails on a program and to keep it on track and not fall into that ad hoc inefficient program. A good CI program is not a one and done project. You don't do some research, provide it to your teams, and then you're done. It's an ongoing thing. You're constantly understanding and providing that key timely information to your teams. So putting a cadence of when that information is delivered, how often it's provided, and how it's consumed by the team is critically important to a successful program. And then hand in hand, you build out the tactical execution plan and provide it to those clear owners. What reports or deliverables are we going to produce? Who needs to know about these reports and deliverables? Who's going to be provided that? What is we want to make sure that we're going to be providing the right information to the right people at the right time. That's how we ensure an efficient ongoing program. So building out that tactical plan, once we've identified the challenges, the resources, the people, and the timeline, it makes building out that tactical plan much, much more easy. And again, how do we define success? What are we measuring against? And are we able to measure against that? Now that's both quantitative and qualitative. We want to hit the numbers that we've identified, but we also want that feedback loop from our consumers of the intelligence to be able to provide that qualitative information on what's working, what's not working, and how do we continually optimize the program. That is vitally important. So it's a lot to consider in terms of the process. But again, failing to plan is planning to fail. If you want a successful competitive intelligence initiative program, once you have the people in place, the process is the foundation, is the guardrails, is the frame of that building, that competitive intelligence building. Now, strong competitive analysis program requires identifying all of your competitors, analyzing the products, analyzing what they're doing in their marketplace, understanding what is relevant, what is not relevant, providing that real-time information to your stakeholders in the organization. Now, all of that is extremely time-consuming. Technology can play a role in simplifying that, making it a much more efficient process. Now, my company is the technology provider, but even though we're a technology provider, even thinking about technology and the tools shouldn't come into play until the people are defined and the process is fully developed out. We've seen many times companies will employ a technology solution before they fully understand the scope of the program, and that solution sometimes doesn't live up once they go back and define what the challenges and the goals are. Sometimes that technology doesn't really fit that purpose. So don't put the cart before the horse. Figure out the process and then look at the technology solutions to help solve those problems. Bill Gates provided a great quote. The first rule of any technology used in business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. This couldn't be more true. The process is in place first. The technology should then be applied to that process to help simplify the process and provide better efficiencies to help manage that initiative. It's all about working smarter, not harder. PMA, the State of Product Marketing report, that same report from earlier, also surveyed that 57, close to 60% of product marketers surveyed support 3 or more product areas. Now, that is a huge undertaking for a product marketer to fully support over 3 products. So they need tools that will allow them to work more efficient and be more effective in what they're doing. Technology should be used to simplify operations, not make them more complex. So, the technology that, what we always say is technology needs to be specifically tied to the challenges and the goals identified. They have to be able to map to those goals that were developed in the process stage. Need to have a clear owner. If everybody owns the technology, nobody owns the technology. Well, that is very true here. If the technology solution does not have a clear owner, someone who's responsible for managing it, even though it's automated or it simplifies the process, there still has to be somebody that's involved with overseeing the management of it. So it has to have a clear owner. And again, this couldn't be more stated more clearly. It should be able to simplify and create efficiencies across the organization. Any technology that creates more complexity is the wrong technology solution. Should be able to minimize the amount of manual labor and provide more effective operations across your organization. And then again, of course, it needs to be measurable. You have to measure what you're doing. If you can't measure it, what's the point of doing it, right? So none of this is really revolutionary information that I'm providing. This is old, tried and true information. People, process, and technology. Working, coming up with the plan and working the plan. Identifying who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed. This is all well-established information, but a lot of times the simplest solutions are usually the best. So, this is the playbook that we use when we're consulting with our customers to make sure that they're understanding that there's a set number of steps and a process that needs to be involved to develop a successful competitive intelligence initiative. And again, we provide the technology piece, but we also consult on the way to make it most effective. But we don't advocate any technology until those first two pillars are identified and clearly defined. So what is Compite? So as I said earlier, Compite is a competitive intelligence automation tool. What that means is we make it easy to track what your competitors are doing across their digital landscapes, whether it be website updates, product review sites, company review sites, publicly available financial information, news mentions, social media, all of that digital information that's publicly available. Our platform can pull data in to our central platform through machine learning and artificial intelligence, analyze that data, pull out the irrelevant information, or the noise, if you will, and provide real-time actionable intelligence to go-to-market teams in the forms of reports, dashboards, automated insight alerts through tools like Slack or Microsoft Teams, those communication type tools, and enablement materials like battle cards that your go-to-market teams are using. And that really fuels market advantage for these companies, whether it's the sales, whether it's a sales team being able to compete better against their other companies in the market, whether it's a product development team that understands where they need to go in terms of product roadmap, whether it's a customer success team that understands how to what their competitors are doing in terms of servicing their customers, providing value to their customers, being able to pivot and understand what they need to do to service their customers better. And of course, corporate strategy, looking at what are the emerging trends in the industry and understanding what is happening in the industry. Where does the company need to pivot to either provide a new product or service, provide focus on a different positioning or messaging, and where they need to go to really thrive in that market. So I hope this was valuable to you. Again, people, process, and technology, the three pillars of a successful CI initiative. I enjoyed spending time with you today and hope you have a great day. Thank you.
hope you all enjoyed that last session. And I think it's actually going to make for a pretty great segue into this next session we have coming up, which is our first panel of the day. As Jordan got into, one of the key pillars for a winning go-to-market strategy through CI is people. And this next panel, we're going to be joined by Louise Dunn of Linworks, Ali Good from Quizzes, and Thais Skogstad at Data World, who are going to be chatting through why cross-functional collaboration is essential for an effective competitive intelligence strategy, and walk you through how you can achieve this for your own program. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy the panel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Why Cross-Functional Collaboration is Essential for an Effective Competitive Intelligence Strategy and how you can achieve these. I am very pleased to be joined by very incredible women today to talk about this topic. So I'm going to ask Louise, can you please introduce yourself and tell you why we're here in the panel today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be joining the Competitive Intelligence Summit. I'm Louise. I head up product marketing at Linworks, who are an e-commerce SaaS business for B2B. We sell automated inventory and order management solutions for marketplace sellers. And competitive intelligence is something that's been fundamental in every role that I've worked in. So I'm very excited to talk today about those experiences and to hear from you both.
And we are pleased to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Ali. Would you mind to introduce yourself too?
I'd be delighted. I'm Ali. I've been in product marketing for quite a while. I'm working ed tech. And before I was in product marketing, I was a teacher. So I have a little bit of a different take than obviously Louise has on things. But you know what? I think one thing is true, and that's the absolute essential nature of understanding the landscapes in which we're sitting and how we relate to the other folks. And it's so important. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm excited to learn from both Louise and you, Thais. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, and I am Thais Skogstad. I am a director of product marketing in a data management space. And unlike Louise and Ali, I came from the technical side. I used to be a computer scientist and came to the dark side. But I'm glad to talk about competitive intelligence today. The first question I have, so we talk about cross-functional collaboration and how that is important, but all that depends on the culture of the company. So Louise, can you tell us what kind of mindset or culture needs to be in the company?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that we have clear roles and responsibilities for everything that we do in product marketing, because our work touches on everything that so many other teams are looking to us to provide. And I think when it comes to competitive intelligence, where I describe it to teams and to my own team at Linworks, is that competitive intelligence, where product marketing has the most impact, is where we can have that macro view. So you've probably heard the definition of product marketing as being that voice of the market, voice of the customer. So we look to our partners in the sales team, in the CS organization, or even in onboarding to be that voice of customer for individual deals, individual opportunities, or even vertical expertise. But where product marketing has a real opportunity is that we can be involved more so in providing that macro view.
Yeah, the voice of customer is so relevant, and sometimes we tend to forget about it. How about you, Ali? What do you think is important in terms of a company culture to have a good effort in terms of competitive intelligence?
I think everyone, when it works well, everyone understands how essential it is that we all understand exactly what the market landscape looks like. It influences positioning, it influences messaging, it should influence how you go to market. It should influence how you're using your website it should literally influence every single motion. It should influence product development. It should influence hiring. Like, I think it was Brandon yesterday in the PMM talk that we had on a similar topic, talked about how important it is that competitive intelligence be a wall-to-wall, was the metaphor he used, endeavor across the org, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, it literally takes everyone to also be feeding back into product marketing what they're hearing, so that product marketing can collect that information and then share it back out with the rest of the org.
You're so right. I mean, the end-to-end definition, we always say that sales is everyone's job, but I think competitive intelligence is also, because has to be a way to gather all the information, like the word on the street, what are we hearing everywhere. Any tips like to how to incentivize people to collaborate and bring this information to the product marketing team?
That's a great question. Louise, do you have a magic wand that you use?
Maybe not a magic wand. I do have something that's worked really effectively for us at LinnWorks, thanks to our tech stack. So we do track every deal that's closed, whether it's closed won or closed lost. We do track competitors. So some of them get identified early in the sales cycle through a discovery process. Others we have to go and maybe do a bit of digging into the notes that we have in our CRM around who are the competitors that we were up against, and they all get tick boxed. And then we have closed reason notes as well. So on a monthly basis, we'll do a download, we'll check that, and that's a really important source of that competitive intel for us about, particularly in the area of win-loss, which is one of our pillars of competitive intelligence. And the second little hack that I have that I think is very useful for a product marketer is if your sales org is investing in a conversation or a sales coaching tool like Jiminy or Gong or one of the similar competitors in that space, having really good competitor tracking set up is a great way to have a dashboard ready for you. And the way that we bring those two things together is we look on a monthly basis to see, is anything changing with our competitors? Are there key deals that maybe we want to dig into a little bit more for messaging? And if we sometimes find deals where the competitor has been mentioned tons of times, the customer is given loads of feedback about what they can and can't do or some of the reasons behind their search. And we'll go into that. And just because it's picking up on all of those keyword mentions, it makes it really easy to navigate to that core part of that call. So I would say if you have one of those solutions in place, that's a great way to start. If you're more early stage, it's something that you can replicate manually just by having a regular check-in with sales leadership to collect some of those insights.
I totally agree. Those conversation tools are so good. Sometimes you had to do those ride-alongs and meeting calls. Now you have everything at your disposal. You can apply filters and get to the details that you need to have. I would add to, like, the first time you have a big win with some competitive intelligence that was a factor, that's going to help. So I highly recommend to broadcast, to promote your big win and how the competitive intelligence influenced that deal. Like everything else, the mouth to mouth and the results speak by themselves. In terms of like, how do you start a competitive intelligence initiative? Like some companies are lucky enough to have a dedicated resource just for that, but some don't. So Ali, how would you go to start a CI initiative or a CI team?
Sure. When I arrived at Quizzes back last fall, there was no sort of sales enablement in place, and there was no competitive intelligence that was in place. And so I got a chance to do this, and it was really fun. We did not, have the resources to develop a whole team, but what we did do was sort of own competitive intelligence in the product marketing house. And step one is battle cards. And I think I see a lot of people say, "Oh, well, we've done battle cards," and then they call it a day. And I think battle cards is step one, and it's not where you should end your competitive intelligence work. Once you've got some battle cards down, I think the next step is to do a similar analysis of each of your competitors' websites for the sake of marketing. So you have your battle cards that sales is going to use to enable conversations, and then you have sort of an analysis that marketing can use to enable how we're thinking about using our website and how we're thinking about going to market. And then beyond those first two motions, it's constant sort of just keeping your eye open with every entry and exit into what's, for us at least, is a very crowded market space. That landscape sort of morphs and changes, right? How do we sort of keep our footing as the landscape is moving underneath us? We have to know, and the only way to know that is to really sort of keep an eye open. So we did regular check-ins with our competitors and just like try to stay on top of like, where are they coming from a product perspective? Who's buying whom this week? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then make sure we were taking the opportunity to share that information out with the rest of the organization.
Ali brought up a very good point. So like there is an emerging space, there is a lot of consolidation or new companies surfacing and everything. So it's important actually to define what competitive intelligence is. Sometimes is everything like you're saying, Ali, you talk to your sales team, but then you might be talking to your investors, or you might be talking to business development. What is the next thing to pursue? So Louise, do you have any insights about what competitive intelligence should be and what should not be?
I think tying back to the point that we raised earlier around, like we have a role to play in terms of being that voice of the market, what's going on with the product, what's going on with the market to bring that in. I think like most product marketing hires coming in, especially being the first one in the role, the first thing we did was set out what we could and couldn't do. So certainly some interesting conversations about the ethics of doing mystery shopping and things like that. We push back to say, really what we should do is be led by the data. We should look at doing some exit interviews. We should look at surfacing some of that internal tribal knowledge that we have around how we position against our competitors. And by showing where we can add the most value in terms of looking like, do we need to inform our paid ad strategy because you're seeing a competitor being very aggressive on this particular message? Or, are we seeing those red flags coming up from that win-loss analysis in terms of a competitor maybe being a bit more scrappy on pricing? So showing where product marketing can add the most value through those, tried and tested, very strategic programs that have that impact on the sales rep. That's been really important. And so I think those key initiatives, battle cards, are absolutely something that you should do. It's not the be all and end all. It's then what you do with that information when you do that regular analysis. And the only other thing that I'd add to that, because we've talked about a lot of really great strategies, we're on the topic of collaboration today. And what we do is, because we've had a lot of tribal knowledge within the team that's, captured in the battle cards, for some of our newer sales reps, we hosted fireside chats on how people won certain deals with key competitors, and what we call a landmine session. So what traps do our competitors set for us? Do we have anything that will help us to combat that? And what you should do if you encounter that within a sales cycle. So all really designed to make it actionable. Battle cards look great, but they're just a file if you can't actually take them out into the field and have the sales reps use them. And I say sales reps, I actually mean our whole teams as well. They've been really useful even for our CS team. They'll say, like, my customers just come from this particular competitor, or it's up for renewal. It's really something that the whole company should use if they're interested in the wider space.
You mentioned the battle cards before, and I agree with Louise that it's a good way to deliver all that information to the whole company. How often, Ali, do you look at your battle cards? How often do you recommend people to refresh or take a look? Like you said before, everything happens so dynamically, and there is new information almost at every minute of the day.
It's really hard, I think. If you get down to like a feature by feature comparison, like you're setting yourself up for a never-ending task of having to update those literally weekly, at least in my industry, right? I mean, people are releasing at such a rapid fire pace. By the time I deliver a battle card, if it has feature by feature comparisons, it's likely outdated the moment I deliver it. That's not to say that the feature by feature can't be important, and I think it is. I try to limit the feature by feature more for product information and to drive product development and help to influence them and help them to prioritize roadmap. And I try to keep the sales team much more focused on just the click above that, where we're talking more about competitive positioning and how we position within that category. I don't know about y'all's industries, but in my industry, we often compete in more than one like micro category. And so just thinking about like, how do we win in those categories? Where are we first? Where are we only? Where are we biggest? Where are we best? And then how do we compare against the other sort of bigger dogs in that micro category is where I try to keep the sales team sort of focused at, so that we're not always chasing our tails and just updating feature by feature comparisons. Did that answer your question, Daisy?
It did. And I like the way you said, like, try to not do like a comparison feature by feature, focus on the positioning. But I feel like one tip that I have seen is like not boiling the ocean, pick your top competitors. kind of pick a list. Depending of the team, I would say a number between 3, tops 5, because otherwise you're not going to be able to, like for my question, how often you update your battle card, there is no way you're going to be able to deliver any versions because it's going to be always revolving and you're not going to have that information. What do you think, Louise?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that when we started, there was a couple of historic battle cards that had been built by our UK team who'd been in place for a while. And what we found was as we expanded into the US and into Europe, we were starting to encounter new competitors. So it was becoming a little bit more of a challenge to stay on top of that. So we still do the win-loss analysis monthly because that's important for board meetings and for strategy, just to be able to feed that back because it gives us that finger on a pulse of how our competitive landscape is evolving and helps us to quantify the business impact as well. But we started doing it just quarterly because actually it wasn't as important if there was a minor update. We would much rather be responding to something that was high priority news or something that we could inform, and that's worked really well. What we do make sure that we do is we integrate all of those changes into new hire onboarding so that the new sales reps who are joining or anyone who's coming in and having that sales training can get a really clear picture of over time, how do we win, how do we lose, what they can expect in their region and in their vertical. And we prefer to spend our time rather than, saying, okay, well, this battle card is bang up to date. We had a discussion with the business and they were comfortable with that being less often, unless there was something like a major acquisition. We will still do a, really quick turnaround on a readout with some talking points for the teams who are out speaking to customers. But we instead spend our time on things like, maybe doing a readout of reasons to win versus this competitor that can be used in a one-to-one conversation, or if there is some particular content that we need to develop off the back of what we found out. So we don't update battle cards for the sake of it. It's more about what we can learn as we grow out that competitive bank of assets that we have to arm our sales teams with.
Very good. I like that idea. We have some definition and cadence. But let's say you have the best possible battle card with all the information about features, positioning, objection handling, landmines, and everything. How do you get people to use it? I find that you have all that information and you do an onboarding for your sales team, you introduce them to the sales enablement resources, but you kind of listen to a conversation tool and you don't see the topics like why we win being covered. Any tips on how to engage with the sales team or customer success or I say sales because usually we are more relevant to them, but to get them to absorb, contain, and propagate that information that's in the battle card.
So I can jump in there. My previous role was in sales enablement. That's how I got into product marketing. I was one of those people who was half doing the role before I knew it properly existed and was an option in my market. And it's really about making it relevant to their sales cycle. Like sales are incentivized on deals closed. So spending that time with them. We do try and get a bit of time one-to-one with the new sales reps just to talk through. We have everything stored in an online repository called Start.me. And the answer is, if it's on Start.me, product marketing want you to use it. So when we get questions come up in the Slack, did I see this? Did you update this? Any chance that you have this for me? It's the first place that we point them to. And the other thing that's been really effective, as well as the workshop that I mentioned, where they're learning from their peers and hearing how useful that content was, is also having some peer advocates. So we have a couple of people we've worked with on different sales enablement objectives, helping us to create content. It's a bit of a give and take relationship where they'll come to us with requests and we'll say, by the way, it'd be really great if you could mention this on the sales team meeting, because they're more likely to listen to you as the top performing rep than they are from marketing, asking them to distract from whatever it is they're doing to close their deals in that given quarter. So having that advocacy and showing the impact. So we know that we can measure things like new hire time to productivity, because we are always having that feedback loop with sales in terms of if they ask for a battle card, we deliver it. It's just showing that that's having that effect and that we have a role to play in helping them to be successful as well.
Very good, Allie.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off.
That's okay. I was just going to ask for anything that you want to add.
I just wanted to double down on something I think Louise said earlier than even this response, which was about how important it is for sales folks to hear from other sales folks, right? And you mentioned it just now a little bit, but I've seen that be so effective. If you can get a salesperson to get up in one of those sales meetings and say like, hey, here's how I won, and they cite examples of the battle cards or other competitive intelligence or anything, frankly, coming out of product marketing that they've used to win. If you have a system where you can track metrics on how people will just light that thing up all of a sudden, right? Now they're going to believe it from another salesperson in a whole way that they're not going to believe it coming from me or even a sales leader sometimes, right? Like they need to hear it sometimes from a peer in order for it to be real for them. So I think that is a great magic wand that you can sometimes get people on board with and doing. I think the other thing, and Louise, you've talked a lot about win-loss analysis. We do it sounds like a lot less regularly than you, but when we have done it and we're able to pull out, especially from those wins, when we were winning against the competitors and those reasons why, and we sort of draw a direct line between like, here's what we learned and here's how this is showing up in this battle card, people will sort of realize like, oh, this isn't just, fluff and clouds. This is real stuff, and it's actually really useful.
Totally agree. It's true. And testimonials are important, right? Even internally, they validate everything. So I think we all agree on that point. The other question I have, like, imagine you're doing the win-loss analysis or any kind of consideration, and you find something that you have to come back to the product team and recommend something to be incorporated or changed in the roadmap. So that's another facet of the competitive intelligence that's relevant. I was wondering, and Ellie, if you would have any experience or anything to share along those lines when you're actually interacting with other teams within the company and influencing the product strategy for a certain company.
For sure. And I think it can go both ways too. For example, when I first arrived at Quizzes, the question was like, this isn't going to mean much to outside of EdTech folks, but like, do we get into the content game? Like, are we actually providing the instructional materials, or are we just providing a platform on which the instructional materials can be delivered? And in EdTech, that's always the big sort of differentiator. And so we started looking at the competitive landscape. And what we found was that landscape over there in the content zone was pretty crowded and had some pretty big players. And if we were to double down on what was already winning for us, which was our platform game, that we felt like we could really dominate in this other part of the landscape that there weren't as many players in, and that might be a way for us to, like, that should be our best foot forward. And so we actually chose not to go down a product development route based on that sort of deep look at the market. And I think the same can also be true, that you start to see like, oh, the people in your space, or they're all moving in this direction, they're doing these kinds of releases. Well, you don't want that to be a reason why you lose if it's a relatively easy, release, and it's not going to require a whole lot of dev points, et cetera. And so you kind of give the product team the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and say, hey, sometimes you got to keep up with the Joneses. Let's go and let's do this thing. And most of I've never had a lot of pushback from product on that. They seem to be really receptive to getting those deeper looks at the market and not having to do them themselves. Has that been your experience?
Yes, I agree. I like the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, because that helps too with the nice relationship with the product team. Louise, anything that you want to share about your experience?
Yeah, I was just thinking through as we were talking about it, and I guess as a company, we know where we need to go. We have our strategy in terms of where we're adding functionality, where we're expanding, what kind of things we need to address. And the biggest learning that's come from us using the win-loss analysis and including that product reasons, is there a reason we lose to a particular competitor? And is that sales strategy? Is it relationship? Is it some sort of product gap? But the biggest surprise for us was actually an audience that we weren't winning against, because what we found is Linworks is software generally for B2B, but there is an element where people are doing wholesale. So we're not targeting them directly on our website, which is something that we're looking at through our more solutions-based messaging. But we know that they're searching and deciding that we're still for them. but there is certain technology that they would need or certain functionality that would help us to just win an extra % in that space. And that was just really interesting to see that emerge, that it wasn't necessarily that we were losing to a particular competitor, but by doing that win-loss analysis, we were able to work with our product teams and say, well, actually, if we took this action, do a bit more research into customer validation, we have this other product market fit that is already there. It's just an untapped potential that we could do more with in this space. So the fact that we use some of that competitive analysis as part of our go-to-market strategy as well, that's helped to make it more actionable with our product teams. They can do a much better job of deep diving into documentation and doing user interviews where they understand that more technical requirement. But in terms of our position in the market, we can give an informed view that says, if we prioritize this, we've got the data that says we've lost this many deals or it's impacted this many deals, and this is our right to win. So I think you have to separate out the true win-loss reasons and the true competitive context and help people to make that informed decision, because they'll continue to prioritize their roadmap based on quarterly objectives and using RICE scoring in terms of reach, impact, confidence, and effort. But it's just another piece of data that can come into context that product marketing can provide.
Yeah, I like how you say that you have the company goals, you have like your ideal customer profile, and the insights that come from competitive intelligence may influence those things, right? I mean, like you just told us about a new segment that you're winning that might have impacted the ideal customer profile because you're more likely to win deals with the data that you found from the win-loss analysis. That is very interesting.
Yeah, it was the right to win within our ICP, and just, it's like, what happens if you change it by X%, or we took out this particular factor, how does that change the situation? Just because you can't always compare like with like in different markets.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I feel like sometimes that ICP has to go hand to hand with CI, because you can find that changing as you go. Is that your experience too, Allie?
It is. And I think that, what more can I add to that? I mean, like when you're talking about your ideal customers, you have to know what else is potentially going to be, who are you sharing that ideal customer with, right? Who else is going after them, and what are they saying to them, and at what rate, and how can you get to the conversation first to establish the criteria by which the whole category is going to be judged, right? And that's one of the things that I feel like competitive intelligence is essential for doing, is like helping the sales team to establish the criteria that everybody's going to use to assess everybody else in the category. And if you can be first to that space, then you can often just win pretty easily, just by taking the time to sit with customers, listen, and then of course help to educate a little bit too, and play a role of a partner in that space and help them to understand, like, here's what makes a good fill in the blank. Yeah.
Yeah, and how you're more likely to win, right? I mean, like, it's a partner approach, and that is kind of product marketing in a sense, is kind of helping to put that messaging in and get the kind of control the customer journey in a way that everybody wins. What are the other like kind of very little tips that you'd have given to people like who are starting CI or like are looking for ways to improve?
I can jump in there. Another area that's been really useful for us is we've been investing a little bit more in social proof. So wanting to do review programs. We have been building up our presence on G2, where we know a lot more of our buyer persona is doing self-service. And that's proved a really interesting source of information for competitive scoring as well. So we can see, actually, this person's investing a lot of messaging on onboarding, but what we actually know is that's one of the key reasons that customers come over to us is that they struggle during the onboarding. So it just helps us to give more threads to pull on, what their best customers are saying about them versus what the deals that we're showing up in. Because one of the challenges that I think you do have with a CI program is resource. It's who are you getting access to? So recent evaluators are hard to come by. So seeing somebody who's an existing customer giving very honest feedback about the inside perspective as a customer, it just tells you a lot more than their like best case study on the website, which has been constructed to maybe lean into their differentiators and their ideal customer profile. So that's been something that is another extra little source. I came from the social media world. I make sure I go and follow all of my competitors so that it just naturally appears in my LinkedIn feed. I can see what people are talking about. And being in product marketing, I connect with other product marketers. I want to see what's going on in the space and what they're excited about, because it gives me a chance to think about their mindset as well.
I think one of the things that we keep walking around that is so important and so essential, and Louis, you started off the conversation with this today, which is about the voice of customer. If I had any one piece of advice to like someone starting out, I would say, don't make the mistake I did when I was a baby product marketer, which was like, okay, I'm going to take my product, I'm going to take the competitor's product, I'm just going to compare them down the line. And then it's like, oh, well, they have this, and maybe we should have that too, is the thinking or the immediate conclusion that I drew. But I wasn't taking into account that ideal customer. What does the ideal customer really need? What are we really providing for them that's going to help them experience that sort of idealized version of themselves, right? And how can we make sure that we're allowing the customer to drive the comparison? So what if the competitor is really great at fill in the blank? If the customer doesn't value that, right? And so the customer really is the place to start always, and always the person to keep center anytime we're doing this research. I think it's really easy to get myopic, I guess, is the shortest. Don't do that. Like, always make sure you have that whole vision.
I think they use that expression outside in thinking, isn't it? That it's like we're all guilty of looking at it from our own perspectives, whereas you have to get out and talk to customers to get that outside view as well. So.
Yeah, I like this point of view, because I think the worst thing you can do is to overreact. Like, you should not ever react to the last conversation about a sales deal that we lost. It's going to be a lot of emotions and a lot of gut feelings, and it's good to rely on the data. So I would say for competitive intelligence, it's never a waste of time. Does not matter. Like, sometimes you cannot find the time, you don't prioritize, please do. And start small, go through a small number of players, make sure that you have your ICP defined, and make sure that you have your differentiator factors at hand too. Like, so you know how you're more likely to win. Any other key takeaways you want to leave our audience with today?
I think the only thing I'd close on, I know that there's a lot of great talks happening at this event. There's so many thought leaders now in the competitive intelligence space, always worth a follow on LinkedIn, just because they're sharing such interesting information. There was, I think the State of Competitive Intelligence report was something that the PMA was looking at, and I just immediately went and followed anyone who's referenced in the report, because again, bring the information to me. I just want to see it in my LinkedIn feed and see what smart people are doing. And it's been particularly inspiring. It was a big focus of my first product marketing role, coming from sales enablement into product marketing and being a regional product marketer for the EMEA market, to be that voice of the customer, to understand the importance of competitive intelligence that has that real impact on sales. And it's just really great to see that there's more of that dedicated role in place, where it's not considered this like little sales enablement function anymore, that it's something that is really valuable to the business. And the whole conversation that we've had today has been about how it impacts every part of a product marketer's life, from market intelligence through to positioning, right through to your GTM strategy and how you enable the sales team to sell better. So I think it's an undervalued secret skill that anyone working in competitive intelligence, it's your access to data and qualitative feedback.
+1, 100%. I mean, to say that in a much less tactful way, like, if you're not doing competitive intelligence, you're probably not doing your best at your job. Like, you could be doing your job with so much more confidence and with much more efficiently, and probably far more successfully, if you just take the time to really immerse yourself in that landscape and know it inside and out.
Yeah, I like your advice, because they were right on. And I just add, use the power of your network. You're going to learn so much from other product marketers. Does not matter if they're baby PMMs or if they're like VPs and senior level. We learn something from those type of conversations every day. I know I learned today. So thank you so much, Louise and Ellie. Looking forward to engage with you in the future. Thank you everyone who attended the panel today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.